So I know everyone's been waiting for Mike and I to have a chat around the Atari 7800 versus the NES system. And since I really have no frame of reference on either or limited, uh, hope you enjoy the Dr. Mike show. Watching the Dr. Mike show will be me, Kelly, at KELLYTHUL on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X. And joining me as always.
I am Dr. Mike. This is Bog Panda.
Oh,
You
yeah,
can
there's
find
that too.
you can find me at
There's
official
a
video
logo
game panda.
somewhere.
Yeah, they saw the logo.
They'll
They get
figure
it.
it
They know
out.
what's going on. Make sure you guys like and subscribe so you can see more of this finely tuned work that we put into this
Well-oiled machine.
well-oiled machine. Make sure you leave some comments about how you found out what the name of the show was. And make sure you guys are doing it while you're wearing some merchandise. You know what the perfect thing to do with your merchandise is? Walk around the neighborhood with some headphones on, playing that hard no playlist. It's the world's shortest podcast. You can find it right here.
Yeah, so you're probably not gonna get very far away from your house. It's all the episodes be over. It's really short.
It's a walk for indoor people.
Yeah, to the couch. You know?
You got to listen to the whole playlist.
So talk to me about. I have so I, through some emulation experience, through Super Console X, through my RG 35XX, I've had a chance to increase my exposure to Atari 7800 games and NES games, and so I've got a little bit of a base, but I think your experience is richer and deeper, and the whole Beatles or Rolling Stones, Atari 7600 or NES. These are the debates for the ages, and Betty White or a funny actress comedian. Those are the kind of arguments that you want to get into. Um, so lead me through a conversation on that a little bit. To me, I
So,
think the market has already spoken, but go ahead.
oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, NES just completely dominated the video game market at that time, with the exception of like Brazil and some places where Sega really took off the Master System because they could manufacture it locally. So they weren't paying huge import taxes. Um, Otherwise, though, NES really just kind of took over the console market for a while there, and understandably slow. So there are incredible games for it. There are games that look great, games that still hold up to this day, games that are turned into $1 billion movies this year, like the Mario Brothers game, which bizarrely did pull some plot points from the 90s movie, which could be a whole episode in itself. Um, but I mean, they created so much, so many huge franchises came from there. So it it earned its place on the consoles Mount Rushmore that there might be. I discovered the 7800 late. I was 2600 fan, as most people. I knew the Atari, arcade games, and then of course I had a little bit of experience with Lynx and Jaguar. And then third party Atari doing games for third party companies and things like that. I came to the 7800 later and really got my appreciation for it with Evercade. There was Evercade Atari collections that had some 7800 stuff mixed in. That's where I discovered Ninja Golf, which I will contend is one of the greatest games of all time. Combines ninja fighting and golf into one game. It's all in the title. They put it all up front. There's nothing hidden there. You have to play through a game of golf while fighting ninjas. That's an awesome concept for a game.
It's a title. It's a manual. it's
It's a great concept for a game. And I don't know which one came first. But one of my all-time favorite movies is Ninja 3, The Domination. It's important to say the whole name when you say that because there is no Ninja 1 and 2. There was a amazing movie company called Canon. There's a documentary about them that's excellent, and I recommend that anybody watch it. They had made two movies about ninjas that were really popular, so they felt that made them like the market leader in ninja movies. So they could just make another movie and call it Ninja 3, just so you knew this was their third ninja movie. But instead, it confused a bunch of people thinking there was a Ninja 1 and 2 that they didn't say. There's not. And it's also a movie that blends The Exorcist with ninja fighting action. But there is a long section in the beginning of the movie that takes place on a golf course. So one of these influenced the other, and I haven't looked up the timelines to see which one,
Hmm.
but go play Ninja Golf. Um, there's basketball and some other games that are really excellent. And I really, really, really love playing these games with the Atari Fight Stick. That's an excellent way to do it. I, at the time, though, never played 7800 games when it was a newer system. It was just NES. And the weird thing is, in some ways, it was the more powerful system than NES. But if you look at the games look more polished for NES. So, and from what I can tell, and from this particular video that I found that I sent Kelly, this kind of falls on the reason 7800 didn't take off the way other Atari things did and had no chance of standing up against the other systems. This is a recurring theme with Atari. It had a weird architecture that was difficult for people to program for, so they just didn't. And they instead programmed for NES. And that's a recurring theme when you look up stuff about Atari, which kind of sucks because they had great stuff. So it's a
Yeah,
shame they kept shooting themselves in the foot there.
yeah, it's a shame too because I do think kind of when you go to raw capabilities, these were probably two systems on pretty equal footing. Actually, with the 7800, probably with a slight edge, but just you can have all that capability. You can have the hardware and to do more, but if it's hard to unlock that hardware to do those things or difficult, one you either gravitate toward the other platform, or when you do code for that platform, you don't go through all the pain to, if it's super hard to do something on the 7800, well, I'm not going to do that. So the quality of your game comes back a little bit and you lose some texturing, you lose some depth, a little bit of gameplay stuff on all that. So it's a shame, but I think that um yeah, that became, to your point, kind of Atari's brand is to kind
Yeah.
of say, hey, we're going to put something out that's actually got some pretty impressive capabilities. Jaguar would be a good example. But again, to unlock that and to do it was a lot more work to do than it was on other platforms where you could crank it out. And so you're going to get all the cool games and all the best developers going to the easiest place to create cool stuff.
Yeah, which absolutely makes sense. And it is a shame because where you can really see it, and I know you're not a big NES guy, but if you go and play, especially some of the faster paced action games on the NES, flicker was a huge, huge problem of the NES. That was the system's Achilles heel, 100%. And this is something that followed Nintendo throughout its lifespan for whatever reason. They would go with processors that couldn't handle as many sprites as other systems. So it would limit the number of characters you could have on screen. The problem with that is, let's just say a sports title, for example, you have to have a certain number of characters on screen, and it's more than Nintendo could do. So what happens is it has to constantly redraw those sprites because it can't leave them on the screen. So you just get flickering characters that are seizure inducing, I'm sure, for some people throughout the whole game. It's distracting. It looks awful. And that's something that followed through even to Super Nintendo. If you look at Super Nintendo games, like one of the big debates people have, Genesis had Streets of Rage, Super Nintendo had the Final Fight series. They're very similar games, these side scrolling urban set beat 'em up games. The Genesis one, even though it doesn't have the color palette that Super Nintendo has to make it look brighter and flashier, it could have multiple enemies on screen. Whereas there's never more than like two enemies on screen on the Super Nintendo version. You fight a guy, another guy pops up. You fight him, another guy pops up. Whereas, you get the full action packed multiple characters on screen and explosions and things like that going on in Streets of Rage. And it really just comes down to the processing choices that they made for their architecture, where for whatever reason, they were always kind of a step behind on the processing. So you can really see on the better games of the 7800, there's a bunch of sprites on screen and there's no flicker. Everything's running fine. And it's not, super fast, but there's no noticeable slowdown, which was a huge problem with Nintendo. Tons of slowdown on their stuff again, going through to Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, and things like that. Slowdown was a big issue for them. So it's a shame that Atari just didn't know how to properly get the information out there they needed to developers to learn how to make good games for their system.
Yeah, and I think you see that, and we, so I think it's fair. I'll do this based off zero research, broad
It's the
assumptions.
best way to do it.
Yeah, but I'm sure I'm right. So, in that, I bet you if you start to look to the kind of first and second level of decision makers in Nintendo, or so the people that are calling the ball on, okay, here's how we're going to move forward with this platform or not. I am going to guess people who were past developers, who are still developers, whatever. I bet you if you look at the Nintendo structure, you're going to see people who actually have created games and know what it means to create games, being involved in the final decision, say that's an okay platform to move forward with. And I'm going to bet you on the Atari side, it's all marketing people. It's all, it is, the decision makers, the people who code this thing are nowhere close to the people that sign off and saying, yeah, here's what we're going to do. So that'd be my guess.
Yeah, and that makes sense, especially when you look at, to a much more amplified degree, what happened years later with the Jaguar, where they were developing two different systems at the same time for some reason and just wasting tons of money, dropped one of them and decided to go forward with Jaguar, but then put a crazy system of 64-bit, 32-bit, and 16-bit processors in it that just confused everybody and made it a lot harder and more cumbersome to make games for it. So a lot of companies just didn't make games for it. And some of the ones that did just ported 16-bit games over because one of the processors was a 16-bit processor. So rather than learn Jaguar, they just had to play the 16-bit games.
Yep. So if any of you would like to share with us in the comments kind of where you're at on NES versus 7800, 7800 fans out there, help fill us in on some of the things we're missing in terms of the gems on that. I do think, Ninja Golf alone makes the 7800 a worthwhile console. So
I agree.
Thumbs up on
And
that.
have you seen Ninja 3, sir?
I have not.
I highly recommend it.
We'll put that in the queue.
And Atari, where is our Jaguar Mini?
Please. Yes, that'd be nice. And then Nintendo, don't worry about the Virtual Boy Mini. We got that covered.
Bog Boy's coming.
It's going to be awesome.
Bog Panda.